Now, before any of the haters get excited, this is not a video to discourage anyone from doing keto. Quite the contrary. In fact, it's a video to talk about how a lot of people struggle to keto adapt and what to do about that as it comes to blood sugar. So stay tuned. Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I am known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's video. Today's video is with my friend and returning guest, Danielle Hamilton. She's a blood sugar expert and nutritional therapy practitioner, nutritionist, and we dive into this topic of being hangry, right? It's this trendy word that a lot of people use now, but it's not normal. We talk a lot about how people have issues when they come from this sort of a background of being hangry, adapting over to keto, a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, how they can overcome that and those steps, right? We also talk about digestion issues that some people have when they switch over to a higher fat diet. So all of that is included in this episode and more. Make sure you like it, leave me a comment, and share it with a friend if you find this information helpful. And I also want to mention my 21-day leptin reset. If you're already doing a lot of stuff that we're talking about, but you're still struggling with satiety, extra weight, and things are just not quite clicking, check out the 21-day reset. It's going to be linked down in the show notes, along with a bunch of other courses I have created to help people understand their health from a holistic point of view. Now, today's episode is going to be brought to you by my two sponsors. The first one is going to be Optimal Carnivore. This is a great company and I love their Brain Nourish product. You can use my code Carnivore, uppercase Y, to save on any of these over on Amazon. They'll be linked down in the show notes. But I've been using the Brain Nourish, I've been using the beef organs and the beef liver prenatally as well as during pregnancy, because I believe that it's a much more targeted way to get those B vitamins, to get folate, to get all those things that I need during pregnancy and outside of pregnancy too, right? So great products. Also give them to my family. Second sponsor of today's show is Upgraded Formulas. My code Yogi12 or Yogi will save you on anything over on their website. One of the topics Danielle and I speak about extensively in this episode is the adrenal glands and minerals. So one of the best ways to know if you do have a mineral imbalance that could be causing your adrenals to suffer is a hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation. So check out Upgraded Formulas for that hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation and use my discount code for some extra help on that. All right, enjoy today's episode and I'll talk to you soon. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am very excited to have my friend Dani Hamilton or Danielle Hamilton here with me today. She is who I call the blood sugar queen, and where I really send people that are having blood sugar issues, because she's got amazing programs, just a lot of knowledge, and just a ton of experience helping people with blood sugar issues. So Dani, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. I'm excited to be here and chat with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you too, because there are definitely a lot of people. Number one, I think we should start with struggling to do keto or do carnivore due to blood sugar issues, due to those crashes. And then people that do keto and carnivore that continue to have blood sugar issues like reactive hypoglycemia. And I don't think that we really talk about these issues enough in the keto carnivore space. I think it's more just like, oh, get through adaptation and, just grit your teeth and you'll be fine. Right. But that's kind of your specialty, is helping people understand those things. Right.
Yeah. I work with a lot of people with reactive hypoglycemia or people whose blood sugar keeps crashing, whether it be after a meal, in the middle of the night, or they just don't feel that a lot of times people try to go keto or low carb and they start to feel shaky and dizzy and unwell. They have anxiety. They have a lot of those symptoms. They feel hangry. They need to eat often. And this could be before they start keto. And some people, once they go keto, they're like, it's not working for me. Maybe I'm crashing harder and then they'll say like, my body needs carbs. And so I work with a lot of people like this. And, at some point, initially, for some of the people, we do need to keep carbs in. And what I find is that people have such metabolic inflexibility. And typically this comes from those high insulin levels, which are blocking the body from accessing the stored sugar in their liver, the stored glycogen, or the stored body fat. So insulin blocks lipolysis, which is fat burning. So insulin wants to store fat. So if we have these high levels of insulin in our blood, it's blocking us from accessing those stores. So then we're dependent on carbs coming in. And with hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia, there is always an adrenal component to it. And oftentimes, and also always a mineral component, because when our adrenals are sort of working overtime, so that those first few stages of adrenal fatigue, I don't really like to use that term, but we'll just kind of use it for simplicity. But usually we see the adrenals start to hyperfunction. So someone's really stressed out and they get tons and tons of cortisol pumped into the system. And that's usually when our blood sugar might go high. But then what tends to happen is there's that burnout phase where now we've used all our cortisol and now you're just done. The energy is low, and that's when the blood sugar, we can't keep it up. So we see that they're burning through these minerals, they're dumping salt, they're dumping magnesium, because when the adrenals are working really hard, that's just sort of one of those byproducts. So we see a lot of these people are so deficient in minerals. And so when they're super deficient, oftentimes and when they have this poor metabolic flexibility, their blood sugar numbers might be in the normal range or even in the high range, and they feel like garbage. They're like, Dani, I'm telling you, if my blood sugar goes under 100, I feel like I'm going to pass out. I get extreme anxiety. I have to call 911. These people can't work. They can't shower without their blood sugar crashing. They can't drive a car. They can't be alone with their children. So, and then they're getting all this gaslighting from the mainstream medical community, who are like, your blood sugar is in a normal range, you're fine. Yes. It's just anxiety. And so they also don't get help because they're not diabetic. So they also can't get CGMs. They can't get, what is that? Paid leave, paid disability, because they're not diabetic. So there's this subset of people who are falling under this category who are really struggling. And for what I see is that a lot of people who are in the more mild range of that, where I used to fall, keto or carnivore or a high fat, low carb diet is amazing for a big subset of these people. That is what healed me. I had mild hypoglycemia. So I would be someone who woke up, I'd kind of be shaking when I woke up. I'd go immediately. I'd have to get something to eat when I woke up. I would crash after my coffee again. I tested my blood sugar. It was like 60. So it does, it did tend to drop. I needed to graze and snack all day to kind of prevent myself from feeling hunger, because my hunger wasn't normal hunger. It was a blood sugar crash. And then I used to carry the granola bar with me. Once I switched over to paleo, it was a Lara bar. So I always had food with me. And I used to have to eat before I went out to eat. I'm like, I don't know why I do this. It's like this compulsion that what if the food takes too long?
Yeah. If you're at the restaurant and the waiter takes forever, or somebody's late and you have to wait an extra 20 minutes. Yep. I have two sisters like that. I literally have two sisters like that they don't want to hear anything from me because I'm crazy. Yeah. But they both have to have the snacks. And if they don't have the snacks, they literally get severe anxiety. I mean, it's a real thing. So yeah. And I used to be that way myself. My husband he still jokes about it. He's like, I've never seen anyone take food more seriously than you. I'm like,
that's a nice way of putting it.
Exactly. But it's not that way anymore. But it used to literally just be, we've been together for, 16 years now. So he's seen me not have that issue, but for most of our marriage, it was like, when we go to eat, like, they better freaking see us, or we better get there at 5 p.m. So there's nobody else there. I mean, it was a big issue. So I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like those Snickers commercials where it's like, you become another person when you're hungry. Yes. I'm like, that's hypoglycemia. You need to come see me because this is it. is not normal to have hunger that feels that's accompanied by symptoms. So hunger, you know, and that might be, maybe it's something that your audience knows, but maybe some newer listeners are like, oh, so you're telling me I shouldn't feel like crazy when I get hungry? I shouldn't feel irritable, like hangry. Yeah. It's not normal. It's super common. You know, there's shirts. It's like #hangry. It's like hashtag you have blood sugar problems.
We're moving right now. And I used to have a bag and it was called my hangry snacks. Like I literally just found this like last week because I'm cleaning out my closet. It's been there for years, but it's this little tote bag and it's like got this angry little squirrel on the front and it says my hangry snacks. And I was like,
Exhibit A of what we're trying to, like, if that's you, you know, then there, it's just an indicator of these blood sugar problems, right? We can't keep our blood sugar up for some reason. There's probably some insulin sort of causing this already, maybe not a ton of resistance, but maybe some high insulin where it's just, there's too much insulin every time you eat. And I came from having a history of a very high carb, low fat diet. You know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, low fat everything, low fat milk, low fat yogurt, cereals, Eggo, waffles. I mean, if it was a processed breakfast carb, it had my name on it. That was how I lived.
We were like cereal queens. Like we were allowed to eat the Lucky Charms as long as we mixed in something healthy, like Special K.
Oh yeah. Right. And my brother used to get, as we got older, my mom was always like trying to make sure that she was conscious of my weight and did it in the way that she learned how and she knew best, which was low fat and portion control. And I feel like if I weren't portion controlled from her, it would have been a worse story. So at least we had that, but you know, she tried her best. And so I had granola and oatmeal and whole grain Eggo waffles. And my brother had, you know, the Lucky Charms and the Tricks and all that. So you know, I had a granola bar and low fat fruit yogurt at lunch, which was better than my brother's Twix bars and Reese's and peanut butter and fluff sandwiches. So this is how I grew up. And I was always like having to be on some sort of diet, but at every one of those meals, the amount of blood sugar and insulin spike that I probably got at all those meals was so much that what I think, this isn't proven or anything, but what I think is that the body is like, okay, she's eating again, get that insulin ready. And it's producing so much insulin every time you eat that all of a sudden you try to lower your carbs and now it's still producing so much insulin and then you go too low. So sometimes I feel like that is sort of at play when you've had this history your whole life. Every time you eat, you need a boatload of insulin. And now the insulin's putting away too much sugar, kind of leaving you flat. So I don't really know where I was going with all this, just kind of chatting, but I'll let you jump in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people have that history. And even if maybe they didn't grow up kind of the same way that we did with all the cereals, there's still the standard American diet. What we're told is healthy is the whole grains and the oatmeal. I mean, I ate when I thought I was doing better, I was eating steel cut oats every day for breakfast. And I know you do so many CGM experiments on your page, you know, but if you test I've tested my blood sugar eating oats before and it goes up and stays up. I mean, it takes a long time for it to come down. And I literally used to have oatmeal every day thinking like, this is a healthy breakfast. There was no protein, there was no fat to even that out. It was usually like maybe some blueberries on top, you know, let's do it with some skim milk. And and I think a lot of people kind of, and even, you know, my family members, that when they think of losing weight, when they think of getting healthier, you know, they think of the low fat yogurts and the whole grain cereals. And so I think a lot of people that come to a keto lifestyle, a carnivore lifestyle, they have that background. And so what kind of challenges do you see people that come from that kind of background? What kind of challenges do they have with keto? Do they adapt over easily, or is it a rougher kind of a ride?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just before I answer that, I wanted to go back and just say that what you're talking about, I label that as a conscious standard American diet. So I feel like there's no name for that, but it's like, okay, it's still the standard American diet. And that's the important piece of it. It's like going to the whole wheat bread and the, you know, the whole grain saltine crackers and,
Yeah.
granola bars and the low fat milk products, or switching to oat milk, which I have a personal vendetta against oat milk.
We don't do that.
Yeah, no. So it's just, and people, they just don't know. Like, we laugh because it's obvious to us just based on what we know, but people are like, oh, oat milk, it's marketed to be so healthy, and like,
my husband brought it in the house and I was like, I'm pouring this in the drain. He's like, but it's hell. I'm like, let me turn the label around and show you what's in this and how much sugar is in this. Yeah. And he was like, oh, I'm like, oat milk is bullshit. Like, don't bring that in my house, please.
For sure. It's just ground up oats, which turns a grain into a flour, which makes it hit your blood sugar so much faster. Not only that, oftentimes they add sugar, so that worsens it. And then they add vegetable oils. There's rapeseed oil in this, which is another name for canola oil. And I think that they're starting to use rapeseed because people are like, okay, I don't want canola oil.
I don't want canola oil.
But guess what? That's what it's called outside of North America. So canola, that comes from Canada oil. And so that's where they got the name, but it's from the rapeseed plant. And so that's what people know it as, like in Europe and other countries. So they're putting rapeseed oil, which is canola oil, these vegetable oils inside of this. It's probably not organic, so it's going to be sprayed with glyphosate. And it has some of the molecular mimicry to gluten. There's going to be gluten in there because it doesn't say gluten-free, so it shares the same machinery. So we have gluten, which is an anti-nutrient. And so it's just the worst thing I could think to put in a drink. And so that's why we laugh, because we know all this information about it. And yet they're duping the none the wiser public, and who are like, oh, look, there's this really healthy alternative to dirty cow's milk. And it's just like, God, I wish you guys
find a local farmer that treats their animals well and buy raw milk from that farmer. I mean,
I know
that's what we do. And, I had dairy allergies my whole life, just a side note. And now I've been drinking raw milk. Now, if you don't want to gain weight, don't drink raw milk, but I'm pregnant. So it's like, I'm going to drink some raw milk because it's good for me. It's good for the baby. My daughter has raw milk now, and she had severe dairy intolerance her whole life, but she drinks the raw milk. I drink it, and it actually has helped my gut health. It's done amazing things for us to have the raw dairy. And, we're so misinformed about milk, about dairy, and it's demonized. And so we think we have to do these, almond milks or oat milks, or, I think coconut milk is actually the safest one you can do if you need a milk alternative. But the almond milk and oat milk and this others, even, it's like, don't bother.
I feel the same. They're like, what's the best milk? I was like, well, actual milk, but if you can't tolerate that, raw milk, but if you can't tolerate that, I do coconut. Dairy and I wish that I could do it. I'm not there yet in my gut healing journey. It came out as a high sensitivity. And I know that every time I have it, I was doing great. And then I started breaking out on my back. I was like, no, I felt like I digested it really well. And then I was just getting, other symptoms of it. And so it just didn't work for me, but I still recommend it as a good choice. But actually that brings up something. So talking about the dairy, one of the things that dairy does is that dairy protein actually can raise insulin without raising glucose. So for people who are falling in this subset of the population where your blood sugar is crashing all the time, that dairy might not be a good choice for you until you can heal that, because that extra insulin, I mean, that's what branched chain amino acids, they raise insulin without raising glucose. So then people who are sensitive to it can have that crash after. So that would be something good to sort of remove if you're struggling with that. And then always making sure everything is full fat, of course, because fat is really the savior of blood sugar issues. So back to your question, what are the challenges that these people face when transitioning over?
Can I stop you for 1 second? Sure. I want to ask you one thing about the milk thing, or the dairy thing. Yeah. So put a pin in that, because I want to go back to it. I have a client right now who he is really loving his yogurt. And I told him, and he's like, but I don't feel satiety. And I'm like, I honestly think that the yogurt is messing with your satiety. I think you need to cut it out. So would that kind of play into what you just said? Because I basically said we need to cut the yogurt out, because you still being hungry after you've had plenty of nutrients is a signal to me that there's some sort of sensitivity there, and it's messing with you in some way. Would you think that that's a good direction for him to take?
So fermenting does have it can improve that sort of insulin response to it. So I'm not 100% sure. It could be. So the only way to test is really look at the insulin and actually look at the blood sugar. But I would say that perhaps it would be better in a smaller quantity. Let's say you just did a little bit after having, meat and something he's chewing on. But again, the dairy, it is insulinogenic. So if it's causing that, if it's causing the high insulin, it could really impact, especially if you're not getting the sugar, it could impact the satiety. I find the same thing to happen with sweeteners. As soon as they hit my lips, I become Frank the Tank. I chug whatever electrolyte had it. And all of a sudden it wakes up my sugar dragon. I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to get sugar. I need to get more food. It just completely rubs up my appetite. It makes me very sugar focused, and it also messes with my gut. So I find that same thing happening. And that is potentially also because of that, or due in part to that insulinogenic response that we get from the sugars without having the raise in blood sugar.
The blood sugar. Yeah. So it's like you could sit there with a blood sugar meter and like, well, I ate the yogurt or I had this sweetened beverage and my blood sugar was fine, but I'm hungry and I'm craving more because there's something going on with the hypothalamus as well. Like that there's like this whole other system that you don't have something to measure your insulin all the time. And so I think people, I wish there was too. I think that's one of the things that we're missing, huge missing in this, keto carnivore space is like, we live and die by the blood sugar meter and we don't take the insulin into account when it comes to things like dairy and it comes to things like the artificial sweeteners.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned that, I wonder if testing ketones would be the best sort of way to see what's happening. So maybe test your ketones as you're testing blood sugar. And maybe what would happen is if you did it every like 20 minutes after you ate that meal, is look at the ketones and see that maybe the blood sugar is not rising, but the ketones are falling. And that would indicate that the insulin's being produced. So maybe it's sort of offsetting. I don't know. That could be a fun experiment, but also the sensitivity factor is, sometimes our brains, I've heard, and this isn't fully scientific, but I've heard that when we eat foods we're sensitive to, we sometimes get an endorphin rush. And I think that's to calm the body because it's putting it in a sympathetic state because the body's freaking out, but then we get those endorphins to kind of calm the body. So we end up oftentimes craving the foods that we're very sensitive to. And I know that when I was working with, originally, when I first started getting into nutrition, I was working with kids on the autism spectrum. And oftentimes they would be the most sensitive to the foods that they were very, very addicted to, couldn't live without. It's like the goldfish, like they live and die by the goldfish, but they were super gluten sensitive. And then there's also those gluteomorphic and casomorphic compounds. So when gluten and casein are not properly digested and broken down, they form these compounds that sort of stick in the brain to these morphine receptors. And so you can have that sort of pacifying effect. And that's why, the sugar addiction specialist will say it's much easier to get someone off of sugar than someone who's addicted to more of like breads and flours and pasta, because that's that gluten component. And it's much harder because it's it actually is a deeper addiction. So it's just interesting to look at all those pieces. I don't know if there's a full answer, but kind of interesting to
That's very interesting. Yeah, we were at a family function and they had like a pasta bar and I was trying to keep my daughter out of there. And I caught her like doing a handful swipe of the pasta. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
She literally like had like done a walk by and had like a handful of pasta. I was like, no.
I think but it was she like, represents she knew. What everyone wanted to do.
She does. Like we don't nope, let's go outside. We're not doing that. But yeah.
Right. But I think that everyone would be like, oh my goodness, that is exactly what I would have wanted to do walking by that. That is the urge that I had. So she's just living it out.
That's what she does.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So back to, when the troubles that some people might have transitioning onto a lower carb diet, if they have these issues with reactive hypoglycemia, is that initially they're going to get too much of an insulin response at the meal, so that if they don't eat any carbs, they're going to still crash. And this is sort of the predicament they find themselves in. So what I recommend is really starting with hitting it hard with electrolytes. And so we need to get, you're probably hugely magnesium deficient and sodium deficient. So a lot of people, you can even get your electrolytes tested. It might not show it, but, even, blood work isn't the best for everything, but you might see that there might be some deficiencies there. But even still, if you're having these symptoms, chances are you're deficient there. So start incorporating lots of electrolyte rich foods, electrolyte drops with no stevia or sweeteners in there. We kind of already talked about why, because that can raise the insulin again. So that would sort of be counterproductive. Bone broths, lots of salt in there, and lots of foods that are rich in potassium. And that doesn't mean bananas, avocados, if you can do that.
Bone broth, avocados.
Yeah. So we want to increase those electrolytes, because that will already give your adrenals that boost to start staying a little bit more stable. So can you imagine someone who is super deficient in electrolytes, and then they go into ketosis and they don't support with electrolytes? That's why they're going to feel terrible going into ketosis. They're going to be like, oh my goodness, this is like not even close. Like I felt worse than I've ever felt in my life. That would be one of those reasons. We want to hit it hard with the electrolytes, support the adrenals as much as possible with all the stuff that Sarah, that you're talking about, with the circadian rhythm stuff, grounding, light exposure. All of these things are going to potentially help or hurt our adrenals, and, setting boundaries, all these things that we need to do, taking breaks, not being on our phones, all that stuff. So we could do obviously hours and hours on the adrenals.
Yeah.
But those are some non-food things that we need to really pay attention to. And then what I recommend for people is that they can't just like leap into ketosis. So that they start with looking at how many carbohydrates they have in a day and starting to slowly, gradually lower that. And one of the things that really hinders these people with reactive hypoglycemia is that they have to eat often, right? So how do we heal insulin? How do we bring those insulin levels down when we're eating all the time around the clock in the middle of the night? So that becomes the conundrum. We need to get the insulin down, but we have to eat in order to keep the blood sugar up. So it's really hard to treat. So the way in, besides the electrolytes, is adding fat. And I find that so many people, they're like, I did this, and then I had rice cakes. I'm like, no, like we have to lower the glycemic index of the foods we're eating. So that's not the best way
rice
to
is
say
terrible.
it, but rice, and then processed rice that like dissolves in your mouth, all those puffs that they feed to little kids. It's just like, no, don't eat that. It's just like meltable sugar. So we want to avoid things like that. So always whole food carbohydrates when we're talking about carbs. And we want to add fats to our meals. So lots of good nourishing fats from animal foods. We want to get the protein with the fat, because sometimes for these people with RH, which the reactive hypoglycemia, what they're told by their doctors and nutritionists is to eat lean protein and a complex carb. And that is just not going to help.
It's not going to be blood sugar friendly at all.
That's not blood sugar friendly at all.
Yeah.
And I understand that there's a big portion of people, probably not people who are listening to your podcast, but who don't have any protein or knowledge of like macronutrients, right? So adding the protein can be helpful, but when you have lean protein also spikes blood sugar. So you have lean protein that spikes blood sugar, and you have a complex carb that I don't even care if the rice is brown or white. Like, okay, it spikes carb maybe like 1 degree less. It's not doing that much for your blood sugar. So having the protein and the carb, it's like, where is the fat? Why isn't anyone talking about this? So I have a post on Instagram that shows like these proteins are really good for your blood sugar. They won't cause a spike. And they're all these really fatty proteins. And then on the other side, it's like these proteins will very much cause people who are sensitive to have a blood sugar crash. And I get a lot of people adding me because they're like, what? Oh my goodness. I can't live without my protein powder, my egg whites. I'm like, they're not doing you any favors. And a lot of healthy people can tolerate those things, no problem. But this is for the people where their blood sugar is crashing no matter what they eat. It's like you have to get fat with the protein to help slow the absorption. So the protein is essential, but we need the fat. We need lots of fat. And then we have the carbs last. So that can really help to slow that, the rise of the blood sugar, keeps it more stable. And then we want to avoid those sharp peaks and crashes in there. And that it's really, really helpful.
And that's another reason why I really don't like the big trend right now of the protein sparing modified fast diet in combination with carnivore. Like that, I think is one of the worst things that people can do for their blood sugar, because you're just eating these lean proteins. You're not eating enough fat. And the issues people are having with blood sugar, I've had so many people that it has caused them to start having binge eating disorder. Like they weren't binging before, and then they're like, want to lose weight using a protein sparing modified fast type of approach, like a lean kind of a keto or lean carnivore. And then they're like, I get so ravenously hungry that I literally turn into like an animal and I can't help myself. And I feel terrible. I feel sick. And I'm like, yeah, because this is absolutely horrible for your blood sugar. There's no fat there to help balance this out. You're not supposed to, you have to either run on fat or carbohydrates, right? Like there is no metabolic process where you're running on protein. Like that's called gluconeogenesis if you're doing it long term, and that's going to be super, super stressful for your body, right?
Yeah. So and gluconeogenesis is a demand driven process. So for a lot of these people who are struggling with RH, their body cannot use fat. So it's going to sort of demand more of that sugar. I have a cat hair stuck to my lip. It's classic. But it's going to demand more of that sugar to be created because that's what it's needing. So I find that these people with RH are super sensitive to the proteins, but then exactly as you said, with the people doing protein sparing modified fasting, it's causing a blood sugar spike and potentially kicking a lot of people out of ketosis. So then they're in the sugar burning mode and they don't have that flexibility necessarily to get back in. And so you have a spike and a crash, and that's setting the stage for binge eating behaviors. I used to struggle with binge eating, not surprisingly, because
me too. Terribly.
Yeah. And it just goes away once you're metabolically flexible, burning fat. But things that sort of set you up for those roller coasters, we're not immune to it. If we ate in a way that sort of caused that to happen again, that would probably show up as a side effect. So, I have clients who she had reactive hypoglycemia and binge eating disorder. And it's very common to see the two of those together because you just have these blood sugar roller coasters and you don't feel satiated. And then you have the crash again and you need to eat more. And so it's creating this really negative cycle. But yeah, that's a great point with that. And how it really does impact blood sugar, kick you out of ketosis probably. And that will set the stage for the binging and uncontrolled hunger, which is what we're trying to avoid by doing, regular fasting. So in that case, I would say maybe do a fat fast. Like if you need those training wheels, if you can't make the full fast, put some fats in there, maybe a little bit of like collagen or something, but just minimal, like not eating a chicken breast or something like that. I feel like that would just, if I'm biting into a chicken breast, it just makes me more hungry. Yeah,
me too.
Exactly.
Yeah. I can't, I've had to, everything has shifted for me in pregnancy. Like I went from eating, 2 meals a day. I never ate one, but I went from eating like 2 meals a day to really needing to eat more meals per day, because I think pregnancy kind of puts you in this state of like insulin resistance.
Yep.
And so it was like a complete metabolic shift for me, and it freaked me out. And then I kind of had to adjust things. I kind of had to say, all right, I got to stabilize my blood sugar. And that for me, for the first trimester, really meant eating more often and being okay with having a little bit of carbohydrate in there.
Yeah.
You know, now that I'm past that, I'm back to more of what I was doing like pre-pregnancy food wise. But, you know, those like, if your blood sugar isn't stable, if you're in this like kind of roller coaster state, it is going to make you feel terrible, one, and then two, you know, feel like you have to eat 24 hours a day.
100%. Yeah. I definitely see that. And the other, it's not necessarily related to what we're talking about, but it is another challenge that I see a lot of people struggle with when they're, and it's not only with the reactive hypoglycemia population, but I see it more often with them because they have a sort of like a worse time burning fat. And it's the lack of ability to properly digest fat. And so I see this with, you know, with the general population, anyone who's been on a low fat diet, which is anyone who's lived through the 80s and 90s, anyone who has been plant-based in the past, and anyone who's eaten a standard American diet with all the crappy seed oils, we are all going to have poor bile function and gallbladder function. So our bile is going to be thick and sluggish. A lot of people, not surprisingly, don't have a gallbladder. And of course, that is setting you up, that is increasing your risk of having this happen, because I tell clients, you cannot stabilize your blood sugar with fat if you can't get it into your system. So you can eat all the fat you want, but if you're not emulsifying it, which is like dish soap, you know, so think about bile as dish soap. So if you only have a few drops to wash an entire sink full of dishes, it's not going to go well. You're going to have a lot of greasy pans, right? So all that grease is going to just run through your system and it's not getting absorbed. So we see a lot of fat malabsorption kind of things. We see chronic diarrhea, or the opposite, chronic constipation. We see stools that float, stools that are gray or clay in color or lighter in color. They should have that dark pigmentation from the bile. And we see people having dry skin, itchy skin, headaches above the eyebrows. These are all symptoms of poor fat digestion, but also having sugar cravings and not being able to balance your blood sugar. Those are signs that you're not digesting your fat well. And so we use in my program and with my clients, we use supplements to help this, but there's certain herbs and different types of foods that can help. So vinegars can help. So like an apple cider vinegar, not only does that lower the blood sugar response of the meal, it also increases stomach acid and it stimulates the gallbladder to produce bile. So that's like a 3-in-1 benefit if you tolerate it to have before a meal, so that the acetic acid, and then things like lemons and limes, the citrus, that very acidic, can also trigger it. Bitters, things like arugula, that's not for your audience necessarily. I'm not huge into bitters, but I might take them in a supplement form. So like a milk thistle or something like that. And herbs like cinnamon and sort of warming spices, those things can help. But even just taking liver from, grass-fed liver can also help, because that's where the bile is made. And phosphatidylcholine, so foods rich in choline like egg yolks, can really help to support the gallbladder to produce thinner bile. And beets are another one. Again, not sure if your audience would eat that, but beets are also really good for blood sugar. So if you're doing carb ups, if you're doing something like that, thinking about targeting certain foods to help with that fat digestion is really, really important.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, they start doing the lifestyle, they start feeling better, but then the gut issues happen, and then people get really, really discouraged. And do you use so if apple cider vinegar or like lemon or something wouldn't work for them, would you maybe say like taking an HCl before meals would be helpful?
Yeah, but that's only going to help the stomach acid. So
stomach acid, we still have to support the bile. Do you use Enzymes, TUDCA, what kind of things do you do?
TUDCA is okay. I used it on myself and I didn't notice a difference. I wasn't in love with it. I thought it was really expensive for not a lot of use, but maybe that's just because it wasn't what I needed.
Right.
I use other supplements if someone doesn't have a gallbladder. Bile salts or ox bile replacement is necessary. If you have a lot of strong cravings, to do some ox bile at first could be beneficial. But you don't want to stay on ox bile long term if you do have a gallbladder, because that will downregulate your own production of bile. So it's important to not be on that forever, but there are other supplements that are helpful that have these fat digesting nutrients and other nutrients that support the gallbladder that don't have the ox bile in it. So those are the ones that I lean into with my other clients who do have their gallbladder still.
Got it. Yeah. So it's going to be case by case dependent, right?
Yeah, it is.
I have met quite a few people with no gallbladder because their doctor was like, well, you got to get this taken out.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, this organ is optional. We don't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you try to actually eat fat, and then you're going to be freaking miserable. So have fun with that.
Right. And hormone imbalance is another sign of, or like low hormones is another sign of having poor fat digestion, because fat creates a lot of hormones. It's the backbone of a lot of hormones, including estrogen, testosterone, and cortisol. So, it's important to, if you're burning through a lot of cortisol, we need to be eating and digesting and assimilating a lot of fat. And, the whole digestive tract is so important. So getting back into, we have to be in a rest and digest state if we want the gallbladder to even constrict, if we go above that, if we want stomach acid to be produced, if we want digestive enzymes, if we want peristalsis in the intestines, we have to be in a parasympathetic state in order for any of those digestive processes to happen. So thinking about how we're such a, society and culture of eating on the go and just grabbing something and, standing while eating. I used to be the queen of standing while eating, and I've gotten so much better because of this. And then we need to chew our food. So, a lot of people maybe in the carnivore community are chewing more because their foods require that, which is amazing. But 20 to 30 times per bite. I am like a C+ chewer at best. I still struggle so much. I could definitely improve this. I teach it all the time. I'm like, thank God I keep reminding everybody, because I need these constant reminders.
Yeah.
But our stomach doesn't have teeth. Our mouth does. And if we think about how much a food needs to be broken down, we need to take a hunk of steak, for example, and break it down into microscopic amino acids and little, molecules of zinc and copper and these little vitamins, and they can't even be seen with the naked eye. So we need to start with the chewing, the mechanical breakdown of food. So and that also can stimulate, chewing actually stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So that vagus nerve it runs through here. So that's another way to sort of get yourself into that state to further optimize digestion without supplements. There's so much we can do without supplements. I've had so many people say, Dani, you would never believe the change in my digestion from just chewing my food. Who would have thought?
And not drinking a ton of water with your meals too, or any kind of liquid, because that's going to cut down on the amount of stomach acid that you have.
Exactly.
So that's something I used to do constantly. It was like, cause I thought I needed to drink, X amount of water every single day. And I would, try to, when I'm eating my meal, have a couple glasses of water. And that I had no idea, I had horrible digestive issues. Had no idea that could be contributing to some of my digestive woes, was the fact that I was like degrading all my stomach acid by pouring water all over my food, Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so if people are doing the apple cider vinegar, you don't want to have it in a full glass of water.
No,
so you want to do like
shoot it.
Yeah, I shoot it. My wife's like, your teeth. And they're fine.
Yeah.
I'll eat right after. I don't know. Pray, hope for the best. But yeah, dilute it in a little water. Pinch of cinnamon helps with the taste and the smell a lot if you can't stand it. But it's something fun to try.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got, they start keto, they have the digestive issues, kind of work with the digestion. Would you say for people that are having this kind of reactive hypoglycemia issue, that they definitely need to start with some carbs. They need to kind of cut down. But as they cut down on the amount of carbs, they can start cutting down more and more and more and eventually become fat adapted, right?
Yes. And that's what a lot of people are like, are you going to put me on keto? I didn't do well on keto. I'm like, I know you didn't, but if we get you there, that is where once you are able to sort of make that leap, and it is, it is stressful. So your adrenals have to be rebounded enough to be able to handle that.
Electrolytes, cut down on stress. Yeah.
Yeah. But once they do, that's where the healing happens. So everything else up until then, I feel like people can manage their RH, but they're still going to probably have these high levels of insulin, and nothing takes it down. I feel like being able to get into ketosis, your body can finally learn to utilize fat for energy. And that's how you reverse it. And so you are able to go longer periods without eating. So in my blood sugar mastery program, last round, we had a bunch of people with RH, and they're like, I finally got down to 3 meals. I was eating, 7 or 8 times a day. Like, this is huge. And so you have to make these changes gradually over time. But then they're like, okay, I'm not quite ready to do ketosis yet. But then finally, some of them would bite the bullet and be like, ooh, it was still a rough transition. Even though I was doing like 60 grams of carbs a day, there's that transitional period because your body is switching the metabolic machinery. It's getting used to something new that it obviously had not been doing. And then you're able to start fasting them a little bit more, bringing that insulin down further. And then you can slowly, if you want to, start to cycle in carbs again as they're able. But that's sort of the process that I take people through. And it's really, really therapeutic once they're able to really get into ketosis and then experience those benefits.
Absolutely. And how long do you wait before you start having someone do carb cycling?
It's usually a while, because there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. Like, I always use my example. I was keto for almost 2 years with no carb cycling because I would have a return of symptoms. I would have intense cravings. I would say my sugar dragon would be up and about and demanding that I go to Whole Foods and get a smoothie or a, chocolate bar or something. Like, it's like, dude, I wasn't thinking about this for so long. And the second, a raspberry hit my tongue, it would be like, forget it, and even if it was low carb, low glycemic things, I couldn't have that for a really long time. And then finally I was able to sort of just get over that hump. And then I was able to add back in carbs again and cycle them. So
what's a sign that someone might be ready to do that?
A sign would be that you could go long periods without eating, that you're sort of not thinking about carbohydrates. So I would say that you have to have the reversal of all the symptoms that you came in with. So your hormones are balanced. You're not feeling a lot of these things. Maybe not fully, but you're feeling really stable in terms of blood sugar. Like, your blood sugar crashing is not a thing. And you're easily in these levels of ketosis. And maybe perhaps one time you may have almost kicked yourself out, but then you got right back in. So that quick return to ketosis is also important, because that's looking at the flexibility. So I could eat carbs and be back in ketosis a few hours later, because my body likes being in ketosis, and, it's making the ketones, and I could go either way, I feel like. So, but then the other thing is, you might just experiment and see what happens. So I would say, give it some time, give yourself some time to heal, several months, not like several weeks, 6+ months, maybe we're looking at, and then see if you add in carbs. I would do it probably at night, because during the day, it might set you off for a whole day of cravings. See how you sleep, see if there's, wake ups in the middle of the night, any returning of these symptoms, cravings, things like that. And if that goes okay, then wait a minute and then, try it again. So that would be probably an indicator, all those things, but then definitely try it and see what happens, because you can't predict what's going to happen once you reincorporate them.
Right. Right. And I think having support is a really big piece of that as well, because I have had so many people come to me that they're like, I listened to this podcast or that podcast and decided I would carb cycle. And then I ended up like binging for a month. And
Yeah.
now I've been off and I got to get back in and I'm a total mess. And I'm like, I think that if you have a history of the binging in the past, the food issues in the past, that if something like carb cycling is something that you want to try, having someone that is maybe an accountability partner or a coach or a group that you're a part of,
Yeah.
that you can, be walked through that process, I think is just incredibly vital, because it is, I can't tell you how many people message me like, I had, the one meal and it's been 2 months or a month or, all summer, or all winter, all holidays, and I'm ready to get back, but it's been months now because this one thing set them off. And,
Yeah.
I hate that for people, because I know how hard it is to get to that place where you do feel stable, right?
Totally. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
something we work on a lot in the program, in my program, Blood Sugar Mastery. It's about that consistency. And then if there's a falling off happening, that it's like, how fast can you get back to it? And
Yeah.
having accountability, being in a group where you're reminded like, oh, I remember why I'm here. I remember how good it feels. You hear other people's stories, and then you get the expert telling you like, this is the time in your menstrual cycle when I want you to add in carbs. This is the time when I want you to lean more keto, and looking into those nuances as well, and having that gradual taper can really help. So totally agree.
Absolutely. And I guess the next topic really that I come across a good amount, I'm sure you do too, is that people have been keto or carnivore for a really long time and they're having reactive hypoglycemia. How do you treat that type of an issue?
I actually haven't had people who are experiencing that, which is interesting because I get so many people doing that. And so they're crashing after meals.
I've had people that have done it for a while and they're still crashing after the meals. And so
I would
I'm
look
like,
at the adrenals.
yeah,
That's when
exactly.
I would say
Yep.
that, ketosis is a little bit of a stressful state. So it's like how long you've been doing this for so long, maybe you do need some carbohydrate to, cycle in and rebalance those hormones, make your body think this isn't a perpetual winter. And I think that the cycling with the seasons is really important. We live on a cyclical planet, and to ignore that and just be like, I'm going to be in ketosis or carnivore forever and ever is, if you have to do it for a medical reason, okay. But if you don't, you might find that you plateau. And so I would really take a deep look at the adrenals if that were the case, because that's probably where it's coming from. So it's not necessarily about, I would say it's more the lack of carbs that could be leading to it as well, because we're branching on the other side of that inflexibility. And we really want to focus on the metabolic flexibility. We don't want to only be fat adapted either.
Right. I agree. That's what I see with people, is that they just they've done this for so long and then it's starting to cause problems long term. And like you said, I mean, that's what I'm trying to shift over to, that mindset more and more, is the fact that we run on a circadian rhythm. And if we are completely out of sync with nature all the time and living, people that are eating more of a standard American diet are in this perpetual summer where they're eating, pineapples and fruit, things that are grown tropically in the middle of the winter. And that is messing things up. But we have to look at the flip side also of being in a perpetual winter, like you said, and where there's scarcity and there's lack. If we are constantly putting in our bodies in this place of scarcity and lack all the time, we don't give ourselves a break. And there's not really a true medical reason to do that, right? We're not trying to undergo some deep healing. Then I think that can lead to equal issues too. I mean, I started after 2 years of strict carnivore, really being in ketosis, like that's when I started playing around a little bit with the 1 day a week. Let me see if I have that metabolic flexibility. And I actually did feel better doing that. I really did. And so I don't think I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to do, especially coming into summer. If you feel stable and you've got support, I don't think it's a horrible thing to do.
Yeah. And as someone who, I had PCOS, I had insulin resistance, mild reactive hypoglycemia, I had a bunch of stuff. I added back in carbs and I felt the same. So it was crazy to me that I could actually tolerate the carbs again. And then, it can become that slippery slope where it can, spiral. It's like, okay, carbs this one time and now it's all the time. Right. So, working with someone or just being really good at keeping yourself in check is important. But I think that just like anything, we don't want to over exercise. We don't want to over fast. We don't want to over keto. We need to find the sweet spot where keto is benefiting us and not have these blinders. Like, I am carnivore. You can't, if you identify so closely with your diet, if you are your diet, then your answers you might not be able to find them because they're not where you're looking. So that was me when I was paleo in 2012. I went paleo. I healed my allergies, my asthma, my sinus infections, so many things got better. And then I started to develop PCOS and insulin resistance. And I was like, what is happening? I'm eating this is the diet that healed me. And now it's making me sick. I must just need to paleo harder. Like, I couldn't see the forest for the trees because I was so in it. I was like, paleo is the answer. So I couldn't figure it out until I realized that I needed to cut out. I needed to pay attention to macronutrients. So that's when I did that. So staying in that framework, but if you have a little bit of like avocado or a raspberry, you can still be mostly carnivore, right? Like you can still identify in some way with it, but we have to take these dogmatic blinders off and not be like, oh my goodness, I had one speck of an herb and the anti-nutrients. Like, I see too much fear the other way that it's just like, we all need to take a collective deep breath and be like, it's okay if we're not going to lean heavily. We're not going to all of a sudden turn into vegans. Right. But perhaps some plant matter might fit in. Perhaps it doesn't, but not being so afraid to try certain things that it's like, I don't want to mess things up because things were great for me. It's like, if you're doing well, keep going. But if you're starting to see that backslide of those benefits, it's time to sort of maybe look outside your current paradigm. And it can just be cyclical, right? It could just be like, just want to try this once a month, or I want to try this once a week or something. So just try to open up.
I think that the goal should be longevity and health, not necessarily maintaining a specific label. And like, for me, the rubber hit the road in the last year on a fertility journey of trying to figure out like, okay, being this strict keto carnivore was not accomplishing what I wanted it to accomplish. And that kind of started forcing me to look elsewhere of like, all right, this obviously was not giving me the exact health benefits I thought it was. I need to look outside of that. I need to try some other things. Led me into understanding circadian rhythms and quantum biology and all of those things. That's what that led me to do. And in that process, I understood that, we do kind of bounce in and out of ketosis ancestrally. That makes a little bit more sense. And, ultimately the diet wasn't the thing that brought me the overall health. It was a piece of it, but I think we just get so wrapped up into diet dogma, diet cult, just kind of like this mentality that we forget the overall end goal. And that is to be healthy and be happy and feel really good in our bodies. And so just continuing to reiterate that to anybody who's listening, who gives a crap if you aren't like, Johnny Carnivore over here or Jenny Keto, you don't have to have those labels in order to be healthy, and I don't think it's healthy for us to walk around needing to have these labels,
Yeah, I totally agree. And I understand how we can become so attached to something that helped us heal and completely transformed our lives. Like I feel that way about paleo and about keto. They were instrumental. And so I would say that I fall in like a paleo keto camp, but I'm not opposed to sometimes dabbling in carnivore and sometimes like bumping up my carbs again, or like once in a while, if I were training for something, like adding white rice, God forbid, it's a grain, like, but I, it's like, I think that what I want to do is feel optimal, and whatever helps me feel that way, that's what I want to do. And that's going to change over time. That's what we need to remember, that our body's needs are going to change. Just like, we're sweating more in the summer. I'm in Orlando, you're in Atlanta, it's hot, we're sweating more. It's just like, I tend towards looking at more fruits in the summer, and it feels good in my body to consume them. And then in the winter, if I were maybe perhaps a little bit more up north, it wouldn't, it's like, soups and stews and warming things and bone broths. That's what we're sort of leaning into. So allowing yourself to have this fluctuation, if you can, is really, really powerful and beneficial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then just understanding like how, why that mechanism works that way. In the summer, we have more light, we have more ability to be outside and ground ourselves, and ability to kind of manage and handle those carbohydrates a little bit better than we would in the winter time when it's cold. We don't have as much light. We don't have the ability to be outside barefoot. And, it makes sense when you understand it on that level as well. So,
yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, so this has been really, really an awesome conversation. How can people find you, find your programs? What's the best way to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you do?
Yeah. So I'm very active over on Instagram at Danielle Hamilton Health. My podcast is Unlock the Sugar Shackles, and my group coaching program is called Blood Sugar Mastery. We just started a new round, so the next one's coming out September 2022. So I'll have a wait list for that soon, because people are like, I missed the last one, I need to get on the wait list. So yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it was great. I appreciate it, Dani. And I'll make sure to link everything that we talked about in the show notes below so that people can easily find those things.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.